When did you get into child working?
Um, when I met my wife, and she already had a son who was 6 years old,
Yeah.
I volunteered at his school days and worked as a waiter at night in the mid 90s. And I thought tutoring reading every day. I did it volunteer for a year in his third grade class. I guess he was 8 or 9 by then. I met him in 94. Anyway, so I volunteered and I got the bug for working with kids and became a teacher. Yeah.
What
Um, yeah.
What is your intellectual pursuits?
Um, I'm interested in writing primarily. I've been a writer since I was 15 years old. And and as a little kid, I've always felt that I could explain things better if I could just put it down on paper rather than opening my mouth um, and doing things and saying it badly and proving myself a fool. So writing appealed to me from a young age, and wrote my first novel by age 22, and wrote a second and third novel here in the 2010s. I just got blown out of the water with discouragement in my early years in the 1980s. Turned to public relations writing. Then, well, I first turned to news reporting and sports writing, and then didn't have the innate curiosity really to stick with being a reporter that you need to have in order to approach strangers at their doorsteps and ask them what are their feelings about the new bond issue that calls for widening the streets in their neighborhood or whatever. And I dropped out of that, went into public relations for freelance for about a year, and then I formed a rock band and I wrote a lot of songs, and then that band broke up before we played out, and then I left the country and moved to Dublin, Ireland. And I'm just kind of racing down the decades. Came back, met my wife, became a teacher, and taught for 20 years up until 2018. So my intellectual pursuits are to get back into writing. I wrote these two novels. The first one is a series of sketches about urban students, 75 short stories. It's the one that kind of catapulted me into infamy and got me into a lot of trouble because I used urban dialect in it. And then the second one I wrote while on leave from teaching, and that was in 2017, and it has nothing to do with kids. It has all to do with other issues, other interests, family dynamics and secrets and lies and inheritance and money. And now that I'm out of teaching and working with kids in a locked psych unit in Minneapolis, I am just enjoying myself with them and kind of plying my wares of being a good caregiver, helping kids de-escalate and regulate, the term they use to help kids who are dysregulated.
Mm-hmm.
And I enjoy that quite a bit.
How big is this unit, and how long is the average stay?
It's about 20 to 24 kids maximum, and they range in age from as young as they can come, 5 is the youngest I've seen, up to 18. Their length of stay can be anywhere from a week to a month. Probably about 2 weeks is an average, but there's a huge range. We've had kids with us for months sometimes before they find a long-term residential treatment facility that can accommodate them better.
And what generally brings the kids there, or is there a specialty or a focus of this psych ward
Any
or
sort of
unit?
medical emergency can bring them to us. They come into us through our emergency room. Oftentimes it's a suicide attempt, or it's getting in trouble with the law, or it's an overdose, or it's being the victim of a crime like rape, child trafficking, or a worsening situation with their ability to grasp reality anymore. So it's very acute situations. We work with kids who are at risk to themselves and others as a primary concern. Otherwise, they wouldn't need to be locked up. They wouldn't need to be monitored as closely as we have to monitor them.
And how long have you been doing this particular job?
3 years.
Okay.
Yeah. I started in elder care with seniors dying of dementia and cancer in 2018, did that for a year, and then had no idea that there was this kind of job opening, and searched around and got this job, and it's been right up my alley of working with kids, being present for them. It's probably more innate and natural to me than even teaching was. I was really a square peg in a round hole as a teacher because I'm much better as a psych caregiver. It's full-time, hands-on, building relationships with kids. And when you're a special ed teacher, you're at least 50% of your job working compliance and paperwork. I read about you a little bit, and I heard that we have some.
Who's written about me?
I don't know what blurb it was, what website. Just a couple of paragraphs about your early roots of being an early childhood teacher or educator, and I saw something about you making music. I think that. Oh, and then you're an aspiring novelist.
I don't know if
or you were at the time
works. If you write novels, if you have written novels, I don't think you're aspiring anymore. I guess I'm an aspiring completionist, but the law of diminishing returns causes all of my sentences to vanish into imperfection, and then I can't recover them. So yeah, I have a number of books and a couple hundred songs, and I had 15 years in preschool and 5 years as a school bus driver now. Or 4 years.
I've driven school bus for 3 different bus companies, but that was back in the day. Wow, some interesting parallels. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I thought about working with some of our preschool programs here, in addition to teaching at the time, which would have been ridiculous. It would have blown my mind. But
you need some adult time.
Yeah, right. You do. I feel as though the story that I've written cannot be told. It cannot reach the audience that I would like it to reach. And publishing is a whole other kettle of fish, but publishing fiction, which is my main love. In fact, I don't really like to write expositorily. It's just as hard for me to write in a straight line as it is for the next schmo trying to write a college thesis or whatever. And I've written a few college theses, but I prefer fiction. I have a lot of different skills in that area that I've done over the years. And but this essay that I've written and would like to publish is so against the narrative that it's been kind of entertained a little bit by various Substackers, and then said, no, it's not for us, as well as magazines.
This urban youth one or the lies and secrets and deception one?
Oh, the just the essay that I wrote. It doesn't fit the narrative.
The one that you sent me?
Yeah, that's one of the, yeah, that's the essay. The one that talks about the rise of equity engineering in Minneapolis and St. Paul, what initially got me in trouble, as I sort of, as I spoke out against the violation of kids' rights in special education. And I told about 2,000 people in a Facebook group who were parents of the district that there's a lot of bloodshed going on here, that the police are called a lot, that, I guess it didn't print out, but I made a couple of Facebook posts on February 29th, 2016. And that's what got Black Lives Matter on my butt. Although I never mentioned race, and I had no interest in really talking about race, we just had a major violence problem in St. Paul Public Schools. And I thumbed my nose at the school-to-prison pipeline. I'd had enough of the mandated education about Michelle Alexander's mass incarceration theory and the school-to-prison pipeline. And there was no pipeline in my school. There was no intent on anyone's part in our faculty, which was probably 85% white, to do anything but disrupt and stop the over-identification of boys and girls into special education programs for emotional and behavior disabilities, or to just send them out of your class to the office for minor disciplinary problems, like flipping over a desk or telling the teacher to F off. I kept all my kids in my class unless they self-ejected and said, F this stuff, I'm out. And then they would go, but I would otherwise not ever send them to the office. Because once they go to the office, they do become a statistic, and they do end up prone to identification as a problem kid who, if he does something bad enough, will get hauled out in handcuffs. We had a massive dysfunction in our district. And then we violated kids' rights by forcing them to take junior and senior English, whether they read at first grade level or not. St. Paul schools faced a lawsuit, and St. Paul schools lost that lawsuit. It came out that principals were being paid to not suspend Black kids. And as soon as that was in the newspaper, they stopped doing it.
They stopped doing what?
They stopped suspending they stopped paying principals to, yeah. But I think the writing was on the wall for all staff from probably 2010 to 2015, that we were now blaming all white people as white supremacy adjacent, white privileged, and fragile. I read Robin DiAngelo's essay in 2011. It was Xeroxed for us in a staff meeting, and we were expected to sign off on ideologies like that. And most of us kind of just went, whatever, and through it. Our school is urban. It was urban with 30%, 30%, 30% Black, Asian, white, and a few brown kids, a few Native American kids. And there was nothing that we wouldn't do to keep our kids safe, to clothe them and feed them, and keep them out of this fabled pipeline, which I just basically said is bullshit. Go ahead.
1 second. I did tell you that the cat would interrupt.
I like it when cats interrupt.
Well, okay. I've heard about this school to prison pipeline often, but nobody's ever actually explained it to me. What is the theory?
The theory is that that kids of color are over-identified due to teachers' intolerance of or naivete or racism, and the kids are referred out of class. They are over-identified as troublemakers, and they end up on their way to jail for behaviors that white kids aren't identified for. And so knowing that this wasn't the case for us, and nobody else I talked to at any of the high schools in St. Paul thought anything different than I. And so, I don't know where,
Just to get my head around this. So let's say in the theory, there's, let's say 5 black kids and 5 white kids. And there's like 1 out of every 5 black kids is a troublemaker, 1 out of every white kid is a troublemaker, but only the black kid, 1 out of the 5 is selected and persecuted or prosecuted on the school level, and then they get acculturated to being in trouble. The disciplinary process actually enforces their behavior, enforces their identity as a criminal, and then they go out into the world and they perpetuate those crimes. Whereas the white kid who gets away with that bad behavior, he doesn't get used to being identified as a criminal or something. Like, because because that white kid is statistically less likely to run into trouble with the school laws, it carries on in life and he just kind of grows out of criminality. Whereas the black kid, the criminality is actually ingrained by the disciplinary process.
Right. That's exactly it.
Is that it? That's it?
Well, it's based upon incarceration rates, which are overwhelmingly black. But
they say that that's because of the school's fault. The schools themselves are teaching black people to be criminals because they're disciplining criminal behavior.
That we don't love them enough. We don't appreciate them. We are set in our white privilege to not understand black culture. We are unable to look at a black child as equally capable of achievement and equally capable of behaving. We see them as set to misbehave. We see them as less than other white kids. And so the minute something goes sideways in a classroom setting, you're going to pick on the black kid because of your white privilege. You can't understand black life. You can't understand the stresses that your community is under. And so you're naturally prone to call for a referral to the special ed department to watch this kid very closely and diagnose him with a disability from which he'll never escape. But you put it pretty succinctly, that white kids, the theory is that white kids do not face the same referral process for the same behavior.
Yeah.
And I call bullshit on that.
So in the theory, what is the solution to that? Check your privilege, I guess. Be kinder, be more lenient to the black kids. Make sure that the statistics have equity of criminality, or at least prosecution of criminality. And that will then lead somehow to black culture flourishing, so-called black culture, as far as these people see the black culture.
Yeah, check your privilege. Certainly work overtime to... I guess if we look at it from a constructive standpoint to learn more about Black culture, to learn more about African culture, to expose yourself to different family styles. That would be the constructive way to go about trying to reduce your racism. And it's just assumed that you are. You have the original sin of racism. It's burned into you from birth on.
But how does changing your racism materially benefit the Black community?
Well, we don't have any evidence that changing your racism has any productive results. I've never seen any equity program that could promise equality. But they are dead set on equity of outcome, and
which means juking the stats.
Juking the stats, yeah. It means that we'll do anything to make sure that white people be quiet, sit down and listen, and we need to continue to amplify Black voices, and we've got to do something in order to grow the visibility of Black staff and Black mentors and Black educators throughout the district. In Minneapolis right now, there is a settlement of their strike, memorandum of agreement language to not lay off educators of color if layoffs come. And they are facing a humongous debt. So they will probably, and that debt follows kids. And if you're in debt, you have to lay off teachers. And if they lay off teachers, they are going to lay off teachers who are not of color, according to this memorandum of agreement. I haven't seen it yet. I've seen the proposal, but I know that they can amend it and fix it after the fact. The strike is settled. Kids are back in school, but they have not put out.
Where's the debt from?
The debt is from the tax base. Oh, the debt is from losing
how did
kids.
They get into debt?
They've lost tons of kids. Minneapolis has lost thousands and thousands of families to private and charter schools over the last 10 years.
Okay.
In St. Paul, the statistic, and we're right across the Mississippi River, we've dropped from 49,000 kids in 2004 to 34,000 kids in 2020, I believe. Much
15,000 kid drop?
A $15,000,
okay.
15,000 kid drop in 15 years.
Yeah.
A lot of it happened from 2010 to 2015 when we instituted equity engineering in efforts to reduce suspensions. Black families just up and left. A lot of white families left, but a lot of them were of color. They chose, say, Somali charter schools or Hmong charter schools.
And as those families left, is it correct to assume that they left because this equity program led to a rise in crime or misbehavior? I guess it's not crime in school; it's misbehavior.
Well,
right?
$64,000 question. Is there a cause? Is there a dotted line anyway between equity and loss of kids? No, but there is a pretty direct line, I would say, between rising mayhem and bloodshed and the loss of families. They're supposed to have exit interviews for families about why they're leaving St. Paul or why they're leaving Minneapolis, but I don't know that is ever conducted. All I hear in the comment sections of the newspapers and the social medias is that families are fed up with violence.
Okay. And the equity treatment of violence is to look the other way if it's of a certain race.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And looking the other way doesn't solve violence.
No.
Okay.
No. In St. Paul, we kicked out the first rung of the Rights and Responsibilities book in around 2014 and said that level 1 infractions will no longer be punishable. Those infractions can amount to telling your teacher to F off, I'm not doing this. It can be like not showing up for class or walking out in the middle of class. I know that all of that stuff sounds like it should be permissible to not get in trouble just because, say, you're asleep in class or you have walked out of class because you don't want to do the work. But it rises to a level of more violent activities in the same level 1. You can flip over a desk and tell your teacher, you can call her a terrible name. You can share, well, you can't overtly threaten someone or sexually harass them or things like that. And then it rises to the second level. But the first level includes all of these disrespectful behaviors.
Okay, so it's like Defcon, where 1 is the lowest and 5 is the highest, or the other way around.
Yes, yeah.
Level 1 is like the lowest.
Right. And it does go to 5. That's exactly, it goes up to 5. 5 includes killing somebody and, a bomb threat. This is interesting.
Sorry.
Benjamin, I used to ask my kids, several of us did, what is one behavior that you cannot get away with in this school? And I remember in 2015, it just kind of stumped them. I asked every class. They couldn't think of something that you couldn't get away with. And one kid said to me, I don't know, I guess you can't kill somebody. And I was like, seriously? That's all you can't get away with at Como Park Senior High School? You can't kill somebody? But they couldn't think of anything else that you couldn't get away with. You could get away with selling drugs in the bathroom. You could get away with sharing sexual videos. I mentioned a whoring train in my Facebook post, and that's probably what got me in the most trouble. And it just happened that a few months before I said that, our entire football team had engaged in paid-for blowjobs from a white girl. And I knew this, and I didn't want to name it exactly, time and location, but I had known this, and it totally flipped me out. The minute I got into trouble with Black Lives Matter and HR clamped down on my speech, I couldn't talk to anybody. I went into a kind of like a hole. I was told to give up my badge and keys and my laptop and all my access to data, my email. And I came home here and it was like, I'm trying to think, there are silos of information. I just went into like, today I thought of a metaphor or an analogy would be like in Cool Hand Luke, Paul Newman gets thrown into the hole, into a completely sealed box where he has to sit in solitary confinement. Nobody can talk to him and he can't talk to anybody else. And my union would email me once every 2 weeks with single word answers or brief phrases. Nothing new, Theo. Hope you're doing okay, or something like that. Nothing new. And this went on a very long time while I was in trouble.
And you were in trouble for speaking about the conditions of the school.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And saying basically the school to prison pipeline was bullshit. The school to prison pipeline depends on ignoring the fact that children come from homes. It ignores the fact that children are born to babies in our stressed out communities in St. Paul. Kids have possibly a prison pipeline running through their cradle. They possibly have a school to prison or a pipeline running through their community centers or their churches or their home lives where there is a lack of fathers. And blaming it on the school. I mean, albeit we're the record keepers, If a kid comes to us in kindergarten and has a respiratory problem, we might be the first person to notice they have a respiratory problem. But from birth to age 5, there is a lot going on with a kid that belongs in that pipeline. And to say that it's all due to racism, systemic racism, is just a ruse. It's a sham, and it should have been thrown out of the lexicon years ago.
And why do you think that that is a sacred topic? Or, in other words, why would they get mad at you for challenging that hypothesis?
It's almost biblical. It's the challenge of it is that Obama wrote a Dear Colleague letter in 2014, but prior to the Dear Colleague letter that he wrote, which struck alarm and a lot of audience with the nation's educators about the disparities of discipline going on in schools. We were reading the authors of these books, such as Kimberly Crenshaw and Shel Alexander, Gloria Ladson Billings. We were reading all of them and using those to inform ourselves. We adopted Courageous Conversation, Glenn Singleton's curriculum program based in critical race theory in 2009. Madison, Wisconsin, which is a uber blue community, although the rest of Madison is all MAGA country, adopted it in 2001 or 2002. He is a contractor, Glenn Singleton, in Loudoun County, Virginia right now, where a lot of the heat is generated over critical race theory. So we were bathing in this. We were up to our necks in what it wasn't called critical race theory in 2009. The vernacular for it was just equity, diversity and equity. And they didn't put them all together as DEI. It was just, we want to be more equitable. We couldn't say equality anymore, and we pretty soon weren't talking about diversity anymore. We were just talking about equity, and trying to work on our unconscious bias.
And that did wonders for the kids. Their reading and their math skills
it just skyrocketed. Yep. Oh, it translated immediately to great test scores. No, it had zero impact.
Okay.
Nobody's ever been able to say what their goal is for the increase of awareness in equity issues so that kids can get done with high school and become good citizens of America. Nothing's ever been, they don't have stated goals. That's the tell with equity engineering.
They want numbers, right? They're looking for numbers. If the data can show.
So that the data can show that Black kids are no longer the ones being referred to the police and being picked up inordinately. The thing that you can't talk about is how much misbehavior Black kids do in school. They come to us with a lot of history of trauma, and they tend to need the most attention, and they get the most attention. And a decent teacher who survived more than a year will be able to work really effectively with that population. And so we don't talk about behaviors. When it comes to a kid getting kicked out of class, we talk about restorative justice and how the rest of the class needs to welcome that child back and help fold him back in with wraparound support and and restore him.
Does that work? Has that worked? Is there data on that? Have you seen that
I
process?
think I don't know the data on it. We started using it in around 2013, 2014, but I don't know the data. I know that in individual cases, it's spotty in success. It allows a kid to not experience harsh punishment, if any punishment at all. It allows the kid to see how his behavior impacted the boy whose books he shoved off his desk or slammed on the floor, and how he shouldn't do that kind of thing. So in individual cases, yes, but the sheer volume of behaviors in an urban classroom with regular education students is so high, and there's such a flurry of things going on that it's difficult in today's climate to work on academics. And what they're teaching kids academically is a whole other issue, because it's changed quite a bit.
What is academics now?
Well, it's still academics,
Equidemics?
What do
Equidemics? Yeah.
Academics. Yeah, probably. No, they've just inserted a lot of equity measures into curriculum. The English lexicon for what they're reading is pretty much equity based. The social studies curriculum is a big deal right now because it's now going to feature, instead of human geography, they're going with ethnic studies, which has been a hot button issue because it's really a lot about race.
In what way? Is it just like a history of different cultures, or is it how they were all oppressed by one culture?
I think it's just much more heavily weighted towards groups that they feel are underrepresented by classical history curriculum. And to this date, I still have little skirmishes with people about whether critical race theory is just history. People think, it's just history. And I'm like, no, it's not just history. We've had history that was pretty accurate. In the 70s, when I was in high school, we had old school textbooks, ratty and their bindings ripped off of them, but that talked about slavery's horrible impact on the family and the 3/5 rule about voting in the South and Jim Crow, and redlining and the Civil Rights Acts of the 60s and affirmative action. We had all that information available to us students in the 70s. I don't see critical race theory that way at all. I see it as a mandate that everything be squished into a today lens. So we're going to, for instance, leave out parts of the Revolutionary War, or we're just going to make a lot more room for, I want to just leave off on this topic because I'm not an expert in what's in a social studies curriculum right now. I'm really not. Even when I was there, I wasn't, because it was constantly in more flux than the English curriculum was, or than the science curriculum was. It was the social studies curriculum when I was a teacher was in a ton of flux. But I've never felt that our scar of chattel slavery and its residual impacts I've never felt that they weren't taught in school. Certainly were when I taught, and I felt as though they were when I was a kid. So
Behind you is a photograph of people having a dance party, I believe.
yeah, that's a dance party.
What's the significance of that picture that's in your article that you sent me?
This is a rally to fire me at a school board meeting in 2016. This is a bunch of people pictured in the Pioneer Press newspaper of St. Paul in March of 2016, screaming at the school board that I should be fired. For my speech.
Was there a sentence that was so direly offensive that exposed your supremacist underpinnings?
Oh, I used the word whoring.
Whoring, okay.
Oh, and I used the school to prison pipeline, obviously.
Okay, yeah.
I basically
used the word whoring once. People, that's a trigger word for some people.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah. It doesn't fit the narrative.
So there's public education's a big mess, especially in urban centers, right? Funding is all out of whack. I guess this charter school thing is divested from the public school infrastructure students, and therefore they have less money. I don't know if they're necessarily adapting to that by actually trimming down the budget in other ways than just staff, but I'm sure that they have plenty of infrastructure, just building and maintenance and stuff that they can't just stop paying for because it's already built and you have to maintain it in one way or another. But what is the line of attack or the most important thing when looking at considering public education? What's the biggest problem? And if you had power and you decided to use the power wisely, what's the wisest thing that you would focus on, or what's the thing that you would focus on most to move it towards a better situation?
Well, because I come from old liberal roots, I would probably argue for decentralized administration over the school, professional development, and discipline. I used to argue 15 years ago that schools should study their rights and responsibilities and adapt them locally at each school using a site council for advice, and that and that would at least provide the school with a sense of destiny that they have for themselves, that the staff themselves can manage issues with their principal and conquer some of the thorniest problems which relate to achievement and behavior. And that comes, like I say, from my liberal background, where I would like to see a public school live up to its original promise of being a great quality place for kids to get educated and become good citizens. I know a lot of people would like to destroy unions, destroy the public schools, burn them to the ground, and start all over again. But I'm not at that place. I have a lot of spite for unions because of how 3 different unions treated me, and abandoned my case and called me a racist themselves. But so I'm not a fan of unions either. But I'm not, and we used a charter school for our son after he was bullied in high school. But and it did a great job for him. Minnesota, I think, had the first charter school in the nation here in 1989. We are a state of firsts. This place is quite liberal and blue, bright blue on historical maps long before Walter Mondale lost to Ronald Reagan in 1984. So we have famous senators from here, and I think of it all. I think of Minnesota also as a home for moral panics that have kind of exploded out from here across the country, starting with
Prohibition.
Prohibition. Yeah.
Oh, really? That was just a wild guess.
Oh, really? Yeah. It's the Volstead Act for Prohibition was written by Andrew Volstead, who was from here.
Okay.
So we spread that, and we had the nation's first teacher strike in 1946 in St. Paul. That's the first teacher strike. I don't know our full history on Marxism and communism. I know there's a lot to tap into there from the 30s, 40s, and 50s in Minnesota. Mm-hmm. There are friends of mine who are quite more authoritative about that. But then we ran into the 1983 daycare pedophilia hoax in Jordan, Minnesota. Jordan, Minnesota was the site of a real hysterical panic that children were being molested in a daycare. Not just a couple of them, but over 30 kids. And it turned out to be made up.
That was in 1983. I remember hearing that story, and I must have been 7 or 8. For some reason, that's one of the first national news stories that I remember. And I remember thinking, like, why would people do that? Like, it was just this weird kind of thing that I couldn't square, but it was all over the TV or something. I don't know how I absorbed it. It's just odd that is something that one of my first media memories.
I had just gotten out of college, and my dad was a social worker in Carver County, and Jordan is in Carver County, and he didn't have any dealings with that, but we watched it every night on the news. We watched the prosecutor, Kathleen Morris, who was later disgraced for having planted memories in children by first separating them away from their parents and interviewing the kids when they weren't in the presence of their parents, and was able to extract accusations out of them. It was nuts, absolutely nuts. Of course, we adopted critical race theory in 2009 after a series of diversity programs in the 2000s failed, didn't yield any results. And critical race theory came to us by way of courageous conversations, once again from San Francisco's Glenn Singleton. And he has a network of over, at least in 2017, over 200 school districts across the nation, a lot of them in Minnesota.
And so one assumes that he's collecting data over the last 13 years of him implementing these programs and how they've changed the schools.
His publishing contract actually ended in 2013, but we spent $1.3 million on it in St. Paul and trained a bunch of teachers in order to get the word out to everybody. Mm-hmm. And we were all strongly encouraged to attend courageous conversations. And then that name changed into Beyond Diversity.
Beyond Diversity.
Yeah, I don't know what is Beyond Diversity.
Like monoversity, university, I guess.
Yeah, the multiversity. So
there's something that you said earlier about when we did that thought experiment where you had unlimited power and wanted to be beneficial about it, and you said that there's you just proposed that this thing called rights and responsibilities would give schools a sense of destiny.
I suggested that.
Yeah, you said that if schools read and stuck to their rights and responsibilities, I don't know the word for it, like a paper or like some sort of pamphlet.
Oh, it's just the rights and responsibilities is just a rule book.
Yeah, a rule book.
It's what kids have to go by. If the
and
schools,
the teachers, the whole thing.
Right. Yes. Yeah. The whole shebang. Social media guidelines, all kinds of guidelines. Covers everything from good behavior to bad behavior. And your rights as a kid. So if that had been adhered to, God knows, what we would have been able to do. I know I sound crotchety when I say, in my day in 2013, we used to have an in-school suspension room, and when the bad kids did bad things, they got to go to that room. And but that is the case. We closed our in-school suspension room, and then we had no place to send kids who were having such a hard day that they needed to be out of the room. They were here at school. My kids would go over to her room, and her name is Terry. She is awesome. Sit down. They'd have to give up their cell phone and put it in a basket, and then she made them sit and work according to lesson plans that we provided. And then they could come back next hour or take more time if they needed more time. But it was a great idea, and we ditched it. A lot of schools have ditched this because kids can't do wrong, Kids don't misbehave. They're just acting out their stresses.
Thanks for dropping that Minnesota,
Got into it.
I'm just going to do a little philosophical word dance here. So rights and responsibilities basically means an expectations and consequences, right? So it's kind of a rule of law, and it's conditioning the kids to understand that there is a procedure by which you will be delivered consequences or disciplined if you violate these different rules. That establishes expectations. This diversity, equity, inclusion, courageous conversation, CRT, whatever they're going to call it next week, completely demolishes that and gives the goal of liberty and just this broad hope that people will do better if we treat them better, right? It doesn't seem like there's a rule-based kind of logical or at least rational kind of there's expectations and consequences. If you don't meet these expectations, there's consequences because we need to train you to meet these expectations. If you take away the expectations, there is no sense of destiny that the kid can latch onto. Only they're forced into only being in the moment, only responding to people's feelings, I guess, because there is consequences with this restorative justice. So you go in there, you deal with feelings, and then you have to figure out how to manipulate those feelings or like realize how you're wrong and you're going to do better. And then also with the stuff with the representation of more people that look like you, we're going to tell more stories of them achieving things. Hopefully, at least hopefully this ethnic studies actually focuses on the opportunities that were grabbed by different people of different ethnicities and the works that they did and the contributions that they made to civilization as a whole, and not just the disparities, not just that all those gaps and all the bad stuff in history. But I'm just trying to understand if there's a central philosophy to the CRT, et cetera stuff that is counterposed to this rights and responsibilities framework, this expectations and consequences framework, that if we adhere to, it's actually harder in the short term. It's harder. We have to actually hold people accountable. We have to, force people to, go to detention, and you commit the crime, you do the time like that. It's hard. It's not easy. It's not fun. It's not just a kumbaya circle, but at the end of the day, it trains the kids, it acculturates the kids to go out and then actually understand that society is going to have expectations and consequences, rather than the whole road from now on is society catering to you and catering to your behavior. Is that
I think
kind of a fair?
You've encapsulated it. Yes.
Okay.
I don't think anybody who smiles at and blesses and or adheres to critical race theory messages of equity knows what they want. I firmly believe they don't know what a perfect world would look like with kids. I believe that it's reductionist. It's continually looking for power and oppression, and the oppressed ones need to get some justice. They need restorative justice. They've been obviously stigmatized, because look at who his teacher is. He's white. He's a white supremacist. So I don't think that they know what they want. I'm almost positive that they don't have the results or the exemplars of the school that instituted this and brought about vastly lower referral rates to enforcement procedures, nor did they achieve academic outcomes that everybody would like them to achieve. I think they stay the same. It's new day, same garbage. And so I don't spend a whole lot of time trying to read up on the latest equity companies' promises, because when I do, and there are a lot of local ones as well as national ones, you don't see what their proposal promises. They don't have exemplars of schools where this has worked and everything's kumbaya now. They just don't. So I kind of go, well, it's just a reductivist way of looking at power and oppression, the intersectional pyramid. So, yeah.
In the context of the child psychiatric ward, what is the rule book, the playbook, the expectations, the consequences that are attenuated to children in very dire circumstances? Is there still disciplinary? Is there still expectations and consequences? Or is that modulated? I just wonder, what's the ideology in that place in order to deal with antisocial behavior, broadly construed?
Wow, it's really a crucible in a hospital setting with kids, because they are there because they're completely dysregulated in all kinds of ways. They're not just one demographic. They're not just diagnosed with disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, which is kind of the new fancy word for when little kids are emotionally behavior disordered or unbonded. We don't have anything like a rights and responsibilities book. We have expectations of milieu behavior. They call the group settings that are sort of unstructured time the milieu, about appropriate language when in a group that should not be in the area of gangs, drugs, and violence or sex. No swearing.
Just no pausing touching. On language. Why is it important for the kids to abide by regulating their speech in the milieu of group behavior?
Why is it good for kids?
Why is that? Why?
We do it to protect other kids, for sure. We might have a 16-year-old in a chair sitting next to a 7-year-old, and we don't want them to be cursing. And so we expect them to watch their language. I think that's just common sense. That's what parents do. Hey, watch your language. That's exactly what we do when it comes to language. When it comes to, an infraction might involve a kid talking about having been molested or raped in a group setting. And there is a place for that, certainly, to talk about it in therapy. But it's not okay to talk about in the room way out there where everybody's gathered and watching or playing cards or whatever. There are places where kids can talk about things that they've experienced in their family life, where it's completely okay. But we just manage the behavior and the language for the group at large, as anyone would if they were in a big family and having dinner together. We have certain expectations that you don't be rude, don't stand up and reach across the table and grab the food. Ask somebody politely to hand it to you.
I know this is really elementary stuff, but why?
Why do we expect kids to abide by certain decorum?
We're talking about an incredibly dysfunctional school system. but like off its rocker, dysfunctional. You could probably apply that metaphor to a child who's completely dysregulated. Why do we expect the child in the family environment and in the psychiatric environment to abide by propriety? Why is that important? Why is that important to the group? Why is that important to the child? What does that do? What does that benefit?
In our group setting, which is a very small select group of kids who are in the hospital, it's necessary to achieve peace and calm, a trauma-free environment that doesn't trigger. And trigger is it's a word I can't stand outside of the hospital, but in the hospital, it's a very apt word to use for kids who have been traumatized and seen incredible violence in their home lives. So it's a noble goal to maintain peace and calm, and it's achievable because we have so many adults in ratio to kids. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it depends on the needs. If a kid is really needy, really a wreck, then we'll have a 1-to-1 where you have to be within arm's reach at all times, 24/7.
So to provide a place of peace and harmony in a communal setting allows for a child or any individual to go through a process of healing within the hospital environment.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
And then after they heal, then they start to be more regulated, and then they can actually do something positive with their life. So if the school system is not allowing for peace, then you're going to have all this trauma or whatever. There's not going to be peace. But if you need peace to heal, don't you need peace to learn? And if there's no peace and harmony within the school system, there's not going to be any learning. And until you solve the behavior problems, you're not going to ever achieve any sort of academic success. I mean, more or less.
Exactly. And everybody who's a teacher knows that you can't get anything done if it's a classroom of 28 kids and more than one is having a bad day. If 5 or 6 are on the daily having a bad day, it completely upends the room. And nobody, whether you don't have ADHD and you're really focused and you can work in the middle of a hurricane, and there are kids like that, but they don't receive education. So we can achieve it at the psych care facility, but we can't achieve it in the schools because we're constantly shooting ourselves in the foot with equity.
And
we're constantly,
not to mention the money problems and it's just a whole snowball of issues.
Right. And charter schools have the same tax dollars as well. They just have to prove to the state that they are doing what their charter compels them to do. But public schools, real public schools, have to perform for a board of education, which is a publicly elected body, and they are subject to questioning. If you want to ask a charter school, how come you brought in courageous conversation into my kid's math class? They'd go, you know what, that's, it's none of your business. Well, they wouldn't say that, but you wouldn't be able to address that without, there is no public forum in a charter school. They are run by boards of directors who don't meet publicly. So that's a big difference. Tax dollars, private.
Do you know to what extent charter schools are outperforming public schools in your area?
They're not.
They're not. Okay.
They're not at all. Not in Minnesota. They're not.
Okay.
A friend of mine has tracked, a mutual of mine, I guess, on Twitter has tracked the spending on charter schools and their achievement, and it's a great website that he has, edhivemin.gov. Rob Levine's done a ton of work on it. edhivemn.gov. It's a great data source. So yeah, they don't achieve any better than there might be exemplars out there who do temporarily, but
So on a systemic level, charter schools don't appear to be the solution. One and done.
no, and they're just as into equity engineering as any place else. There's a huge network in Minneapolis called Hiawatha Academies, and they are as woke as it gets, and they're a charter school. Some of our liberal Catholic schools are really into anti-racist justice, and great, but is that really helping? To is what is that doing? I definitely don't want to sound like a disaffected liberal, but I'm definitely disaffected. I'm
You're not
politically
alone.
homeless like a lot of people.
I'm sure it feels lonely, but you're not alone. Or you're alone with many another.
Right. Yeah. I'm definitely not a MAGA guy. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a
You have that
libertarian.
picture of Brad Pitt behind you. He's in his most MAGA-ish.
Oh my God, I love that movie.
Inglorious Bastards for any listeners
Yeah.
out there.
I'm going to get me 100 Nazi scalps, and I want my scalps. Anyway, I just love that. That's how I channel him quite often when I'm pissed off.
Oh yeah.
And I would like, and I can't, and I watch my former stalkers just raising hell and getting away with stuff for charter schools in Minnesota. And the people who drum me out are continuing to cause mayhem and are a thorn in the sides of public schools. And it drives me crazy.
If you suddenly found yourself a father of a kid, 8-year-old kid, let's say, would you put them in school, or would you jump through hoops and run laps to homeschool them?
I definitely, after my experience of sending our kids to public schools and my experience in teaching, I would really shop around. Definitely look for, I might consider a Catholic school. I might consider a charter school that seems to be classically attuned. We have some in the cities here. And because I would like my kid to have an opportunity to deepen their learning. And I don't think that you get that through equity of outcome engineering. It completely sucks away academics.
And replaces them with what?
With social emotional learning. Which, by the way, we, as a special ed teacher of kids who have been through violent trauma, several of my kids had witnessed their parents murdered by guns in front of them. We used a lot of the tools of social emotional learning, which has now become the scourge of a lot of the mutuals who are looking at the National Association of Independent Schools, Parents Defending Ed, FAIR. They're pointing out that I'm losing my train of thought.
Well, the SEL has been captured, or is
SEL is very much
the sheep's clothing.
Strong purchase.
But you have employed the tools of that in order to help kids through.
To my knowledge, it's trauma informed. So if you know the behaviors of the kid experiencing trauma, you can bring him or her to a place of being able to function in school by enabling the supports to meet her needs so that she can come to school and feel seen and feel that she's not going to be re-traumatized in my classroom. So we were reading constantly about trauma-informed care in the early 2010s, and trying to, jigger our skills. So, but SEL has been completely co-opted, it seems to me. And the groomer movement right now, the okay groomer language hasn't fully caught purchase with my sensibilities, but I have a theory about that that the people who are installing gender awareness, genderbread policy awareness in the schools they are grooming, but they're not grooming kids for sexual exploitation itself. It is exploitative, and it has sexuality components presented in it at a very young age that's highly inappropriate. But it treads a razor thin line of some of it just allowing a child to be more himself or herself, their self in your classroom. But I would give quarter to the theory that it is grooming in the sense that it seeks to potentially separate kids from their parents through privacy provisions, that kids are allowed to come out at school without their parents knowing it. They're allowed to, and this is in St. Paul, it's in Minneapolis, kids lead the way in whether or not they're going to change their gender at school. It's dictated by equity and gender policies in St. Paul public schools right now. I would think that's a violation of the sacred parent role. It's one thing to see a child in school as having a really rough time being out and other sexual preference than what's expected, or for being bullied, or for whatever reason, and providing safety away from bullying. And I know what it's like. My brother's gay. I know what it's like when you're not seen by your parents. And if you're not seen and believed by your parents to be who you are, a kid will go where they feel seen. And if that's, a club at school that allows them to be themselves or not, is another matter. But I get very concerned when I see teachers coming out to their kids and making more than passing deal out of it. As a kindergarten teacher, when I first started, I taught kindergarten for about 5 years. Kids would ask me, "Mr. Olson, are you married to Ms. Olson?" And I'd say, no, we're not related at all to each other. Well, are you married? And you'd go, well, yes, I am. And her name is Karen. Or, no, I don't sleep here. I actually have a house that I go to, which sounds ridiculous, but you know what it's like.
Yeah, I know.
And kids
I field those
have
questions too all the time.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. And but 5-year-olds up to 10-year-olds want to hear about it for about 2 seconds.
Yeah.
And then they're on to, okay, that's enough. I want to go play now. You know?
Yeah.
The older kids have more questions.
If
they
you can get
will
them to
ask you
talk.
about being. What's that?
If you can get them to talk.
Yeah, right. And then they'll get a conversation going. But I don't necessarily believe that it's grooming in all of those cases. I watch those libs of TikTok videos and I go, what about this one? That one doesn't bother me that much. Some of them make me sick. But it's an individual case for me.
Mm-hmm. Well, so you have 2 books that you're shopping around. Do you have a blog or a Substacka?
I have those things, but nothing's on them right now. Yeah. I've been really struggling over 7 years to find my voice because I was silenced by my union and by my district, and was pretty much fearful, afraid for my safety, for quite a while. And it didn't just dog me in St. Paul, it dogged me all the way to the Canadian border. In 2018, I was teaching up at the Canadian border in a small town on the Gunflint Trail called Grand Marais on Lake Superior. And whoopsie. And an equity training program came from the state of Minnesota to do our professional development, because some of my kids who were Ojibwe, half my caseload was Ojibwe, used the N-word. We had approximately 5 Black kids in the entire school, contiguous school of K through 12. Anyway, so we had a new anti-racism program in 2017, adopted
to
around
teach the Native Americans to
everybody
decolonize their language.
Decolonize and denativize them. No, to let everybody know that this is really white supremacy. You know, when these it's all white supremacy. So in my story that I sent you, I note how people in the town who are quite liberal heard about there being the N-word flung around at kids and immediately came out of the woods screaming about white supremacy. They didn't know any of the details due to HIPAA privacy laws. These were actually Grand Porter's band of Chippewa kids using the language, not white kids, but it was white people's fault. And so later in the school year, when I was spotted by a presenter, and she said, "I feel like I know you from somewhere. Have we met?" And I said, no, although my face had been all over the media, all the TV networks, radio, newspapers for at least nightly for a month. And then spottily after that, I said, no, I just started teaching here. But I felt, because of the fact that I was fired within 10 days after that, I put 2 and 2 together. You know, a lot of this is dotted lines, but what are you going to do? An equity presenter says, "I feel like I know you, Theo." And I'm like, I don't think so. But then I get fired. Despite 6 glowing job reviews, felt like cause and effect to me. And so that was 2 years afterwards. So I basically fought this for 2 years, and then my license was suspended. That was my 4th job that I got fired from. I didn't just give up in 2016. I taught in 3 schools after St. Paul schools, and was fired from each one for a variety of reasons. Too expensive. Anyway, and by the time I left there, then the state caught up and suspended my license for 2 years. And I said, I'm not going to teach anymore. I fought it, and it took me a whole nother year until 2019 to tell my lawyer, to fight it and say, I'm not settling for this. I'm going to go all the way to the court if I have to, and I will. And I wouldn't compromise. My lawyer, once again, wanted me to compromise. Just compromise, Theo. Just settle for a 1-year suspension. And I just said, hell no, I'm not settling anymore. So I fought it, and they ended up throwing it out. But by that time, I was done. I was really depressed. I didn't want to teach anymore. I had no gas left in the tank. Anyway, and that's after another year, I was at my current job doing caregiving.
Did you practice SEL on yourself to get over the trauma of cancellation?
Dr. Heal Thyself. No. It took quite a bit of therapy. I was pretty close to suicide for a while, and my wife, who watched me very closely, she was not exempt from all of this. Obviously, she was made fun of and estranged and mocked mercilessly for a year. My daughter was threatened by Black Lives Matter, and everybody took a hit. it was very damaging. And so that's why it's taken me so long to refine my voice. Now I just don't give a shit. I want to get the word out, and I would like to publish. I love it. I love writing. And I got to give a plug. I got to give a plug to a woman who has been my mentor, retired Hamline University professor Jane Resch Thomas. Has meant the world to me. She's in a assisted living facility right now. She came to me accidentally because a mutual friend told me that she had been through what I'd been through, and I hadn't heard of her. I knew that she was a children's book reviewer for the Minneapolis Star Tribune newspaper for like 20 years, but I didn't know that she was an author. Jane was a member of the MFA program at Hamline University, children's literature program. So an English professor, and she was ruined by this wokeocracy, I like to call it, in 2015. Before me, she argued, it's atrocious what she said. It's terrible. She said that children's literature authors ought to be able to choose subjects and stories outside of their personal identities. So if you're white, you should still be able to write about somebody who is brown. Or if you're male, you should be able to write about somebody who's female.
But if you're human and you want to write about a rutabaga, are you allowed to?
Yeah, exactly. She called for forgiveness of one another in a group setting, and she was eviscerated. And it was on the low bandwidth radar. It wasn't on social media. It wasn't in the newspapers. It was done completely on blackboards. Like digital blackboards and messaging systems. She lost her job. She lost her entire career, was forced to retire. They offered to settle and give her $3,000, and she basically said, forget you. She was a single mother of an adult guy, Jason, and Jason struggled to defend her on the Twitter sphere for a year, and he finally took his life a year after this happened in 2016. It happened in 2015. He had a lot of emotional issues that he'd been battling for years, but he finally committed suicide in fall of 2016, and it took an ultimate toll on her. And so then I came to meet her in 2017, and she has been a godsend to me and Karen, and I really owe her a lot of credit for helping right my ship and get back on track. She's a beautiful, wonderful, extremely intelligent person, a voracious reader. Anyway, here's to you, Jane. Thanks for encouraging me.
Salute, Jane. Does she have a podcast or a Substack?
No, she doesn't. I have a great life right now. I do feel extreme anger when I travel back to that time. I do have flashbacks, but I wake up every day excited for the day. I still work occasionally at the hospital and take care of kids, but I'm mostly retired, and I get to write. I get to play my guitar. I get to be there for my daughter and son. And as you can see, it's the sign of this mess here is the sign of a lot going on.
Active intellectual life there.
Trying to be. Yeah. It's a challenge to write about things that are true in America right now, or maybe in the world. In 2016, my teacher friend said, Theo, just quit St. Paul. This is crazy. What they're doing to you is crazy. It's not like this anywhere else. You could teach anywhere in the suburbs. Just go to the suburbs. This equity stuff is not anything. It's nothing to worry about. I was like, okay. My brother-in-law, who was a teacher, told me, just get out of St. Paul. It's not nobody else is treating teachers like this. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure they are. And now here we are. It is coast to coast. It was in Grand Marais. One of my fellow teachers had both of Glenn Singleton's massive binders of Courageous Conversation on our bookshelf. It's everywhere. It's in, there may be some school district down in Mississippi that isn't completely wedded to critical race theory curriculum to help our challenged kids succeed. But I can't think of any that aren't pretty much into it up to their necks.
Well, we keep speaking about it. Right?
Yeah. Thanks. I intend to.
Shine the light.
Yeah.
Do some sort of really off-the-wall thriller about a equity trainer who's actually a plant, who's actually he understands that he can actually create white supremacy by accusing white people of white supremacy at every turn, which is his ultimate goal. It's like a race war. I don't know.
I like that idea. Great.
Or somebody like slowly coming into it would be nice to have a really deep dive novel about somebody waking up to what wokeness is and like totally believing in it, but really gradually like actually having to contend with the cognitive dissonance and then actually seeing the results of it.
Right. Yeah. I always think of the very first episode of The Walking Dead, which I don't know very much about, but I enjoyed that episode where the protagonist wakes up in a hospital and there are no humans around. It's total mayhem. There's trays and tables and stuff all smashed all over the floor. And the dead are probably down the hall somewhere and he better get up and get moving. That's what I've woken up into. I'm woke. I've woken up into it. I feel like I saw this coming, though. A lot of us saw this coming 10 years ago. And there are people who will say they were doing Courageous Conversations in the early 2000s. But it's been largely overlooked by academia.
Well, academia caused it, dude.
Yeah. They fed it. And we put the boots on the ground. Mm-hmm. We're the ones who installed it. We don't talk theory with kids. We talk how to
praxis,
give space and grace.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway,
well, so Theodore, you've been on a hard journey, but it's been enlightening to hear it and to participate in humanizing the toll of this kind of moral panic that we're caught up to, and that has little flashpoints here and there, big flashpoints if we want to look at 2020. But thank you for sharing with me.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it, Benjamin. Look forward to following the rest of your playlists.
Yeah, they keep on going. Here we go.
I can't believe 890.
190? Is that what it is at?
I saw 890 videos. I don't know if they're all yours or other people's remixes or what.
Where did you see that?
Your channel. Your channel says 890, I thought.
Oh, we're almost at well, maybe we'll hit 1,000.